So you're about to learn about this book called The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal. I found it very valuable. How self-control works, why it matters, what you can do to get more of it. PhD in psychology. And it's very precise, very concrete. It's based on a course she taught where I find she tends to have very concrete examples of what to do. So, as you go through this, here's 2 questions to think about. What's interesting about what I'm reading? What's the kind of thing I would tell someone else? And what am I going to do differently? What's my SMART goal? Specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, time-bound. For example, tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'm going to X. I will create a calendar event. I'll pause the video and create a calendar event to link to this URL next week at 4 p.m. and ask myself in the title of the event, how did I apply this principle of not letting feeling bad lead to giving in? Because these things are like exercise. You've got to practice them many, many times. However, some people seem to think you can come into the gym and do one bicep curl, which is listen to this once, and it magically works. That's very unlikely based on the 80 plus papers I've published on learning and behavior change. So, think about it as you listen. When would you share, who can you share this with? You all can discuss it and say, hey, here's a cool video. Here's an example of why it's interesting. And then what's it to do? Like make a calendar event or send yourself a message, like a text you can look at later. Or write on a piece of paper. Without further ado.
Chapter 6. What the hell? How feeling bad leads to giving in. When you're feeling down, what do you do to feel better? If you're like most people, you turn to the promise of reward. According to the American Psychological Association, APA, the most commonly used strategies for dealing with stress are those that activate the brain's reward system. Eating, drinking, shopping, watching television, surfing the web, and playing video games. And why not? Dopamine promises us that we're going to feel good. It's only natural that we turn to the biggest dopamine releasers when we want to feel better. Call it the promise of relief. Wanting to feel better is a healthy survival mechanism. As built into our human nature is the instinct to flee danger. But where we turn for relief matters. The promise of reward, as we've seen, does not always mean that we will feel good. More often, the things we turn to for relief end up turning on us.
What are things you turn to for relief? And it's worse.
The most commonly used strategies were also rated as highly ineffective by the same people who reported using them. For example, only 16% of people who eat to reduce stress report that it actually helps them. Another study found that women are most likely to eat chocolate when they are feeling anxious or depressed, but the only reliable change in mood they experience from their drug of choice is an increase in guilt. Certainly not what most of us are looking for when we reach for our favorite comfort food.
So the thing to think about here is, in those moments, you almost can't trust your brain. And not just trust yourself, your brain. Your brain is telling you, hey, eat something. Click on Instagram, do this. But actually you can't trust your brain because that's the opposite of actually what's going to help. So what do you make of that? Can you think of a concrete example of where that comes into action? If you share this with someone else, who would want to listen to this?
As we explore the effects of stress, anxiety, and guilt on self-control, we'll see that feeling bad leads to giving in, and often in surprising ways. Frightening cigarette warnings can make smokers crave a cigarette. Economic crises can make people shop, and the nightly news can make you fat. No, it's not logical.
You could give it to me in a wax paper?
If we want to avoid such stress-induced willpower failures, we'll need to find a way to feel better that doesn't require turning to temptation. We'll also need to give up the self-control strategies, like guilt and self-criticism, that only make us feel worse. Why stress makes us want. The brain, as it turns out, is especially susceptible to temptation when we're feeling bad. Scientists have come up with clever ways to stress out their laboratory subjects, and the results are always the same. When smokers imagine a trip to the dentist, they experience off-the-chart cravings for a cigarette. When binge eaters are told they will have to give a speech in public, they crave high-fat, sugary foods. Stressing out lab rats with unpredictable electric shocks to the body, not the brain's.
So why is this happening? And it happens to all of us, right? Because as she says in another chapter, these strategies, right, are meant to eliminate the negative emotions we're feeling. We're stressed, we're anxious, we're angry. But let's get rid of that by a quick promise of reward. The challenge is that it actually doesn't really work that well. It works in the immediate, but then it actually makes you feel worse. As mentioned earlier, you might eat chocolates when you're feeling bad, and then you actually feel worse about yourself. Natural and human, but not optimal, and how to be adjusted. What would you do differently? Are there activities you could reach out to? Can you prevent accessibility to these things? Can you substitute a habit? Like if you always go on Instagram when you're feeling sad or stressed, can you try to actually say, before I do that, I'm going to walk around my house for 2 minutes. I'm going to put my phone in a drawer and hide it.
Reward center will make them run for sugar, alcohol, heroin, or whatever reward researchers have made available in their cage. Outside the laboratory, real-world stress increases the risk of relapse among smokers, recovering alcoholics, drug addicts, and dieters. Why does stress lead to cravings? It's part of the brain's rescue mission. Previously, we saw how stress prompts a fight or flight response, a coordinated set of changes in the body that allows you to defend yourself against danger. But your brain isn't just motivated to protect your life. It wants to protect your mood, too. So, whenever you are under stress, your brain is going to point you toward whatever it thinks will make you happy. Neuroscientists have shown that stress, including negative emotions like anger, sadness, self-doubt, and anxiety, shifts the brain into a reward-seeking state. You end up craving whatever substance or activity your brain associates with the promise of reward, and you become convinced that the reward is the only way to feel better. For example, when a cocaine addict remembers a fight with a family member or being criticized at work, his brain's reward system becomes activated and he experiences intense cravings for cocaine. The stress hormones released during a fight or flight response also increase the excitability of your dopamine neurons. That means that when you're under stress, any temptations you run into will be even more tempting. For example, one study compared the appeal of chocolate cake to participants before and after they were made to feel bad about themselves by thinking about their personal failures. Feeling bad made the cake look better to everyone. But even people who had said they did not like chocolate cake at all suddenly expected that the cake would make them happy. In moments far away from stress, we may know that food doesn't really make us feel better. But this clarity flies out the window when we're stressed out and the brain's reward system is screaming at us. There's a pint of Ben & Jerry's in the freezer. Stress points us in the wrong direction, away from our clear-headed wisdom and toward our least helpful instincts.
Our least helpful instincts. So what do you take away from this? How do you put this into practice? Think of the past week, the past month. Are there times you could have listened to this and it would help you change your behavior? Do you see why it's important to not just let yourself be natural in situations? You want to put into place certain structures. So go to generative AI and say, apply Kelly McGonigal's The Willpower Instinct. Focus on chapter How Feeling Bad Leads to Giving In. Here's 3 things I find challenging. For example, eating junk food, going online, could be other things like smoking or drinking. And give me 5 examples of ways I can reduce accessibility to these habits and things I can do before. Almost like building a habit, which is before I do go on Instagram, I'll do X. And the thing you do X is meant to reduce accessibility, but also it's meant to make you actually feel better. Because these kind of compulsions, you could say I'll stop completely, or compulsive behavior, but that's pretty hard, right? It's more realistic to actually build the substitute, so you can actually use a compulsion to improve your behavior, to find what actually does work. What do you all think about that? How do you apply that? What's your next step?
That's the power of the 1-2 punch of stress and dopamine. We're drawn back again and again to coping strategies that don't work, but that our primitive brains persistently believe are the gateway to bliss. The promise of reward, combined with the promise of relief, can lead to all sorts of illogical behavior. For example, one economic survey found that women worried about their finances shop to cope with their anxiety and depression. Yes, you heard that right. Shop. It defies reason. They're just adding to their credit card debt, which will make them feel even more overwhelmed down the road. But it makes perfect sense to a brain that just wants to feel better now. If you believe at some level that buying things makes you feel better, you will shop to relieve heavy stress. Binge eaters who feel ashamed of their weight and lack of control around food turn to, what else? More food to fix their feelings. Procrastinators who are stressed out about how behind they are on a project will put it off even longer to avoid having to think about it.
Well, I think it's great is she's very entertaining in how she writes. It keeps you engaged. So how do you apply what you just said? Just examples of where you're the exact opposite, and that's natural. Your brain just wants to feel good. So what do you do to counteract that?
In each of these cases, the goal to feel better trumps the goal of self-control. Under the microscope, the promise of relief. What do you turn to when you're feeling stressed, anxious, or down? Are you more susceptible to temptation when you are upset? Are you more easily distracted or more likely to procrastinate? How does feeling bad affect your willpower challenge? Willpower experiment. Try a stress relief strategy that works. While many of the most popular stress relief strategies fail to make us feel better,
what stress relief strategies actually work for you? Think of 4 examples. We're going to identify and say, give me 10 ideas to stress relief strategies, and then ask me 3 questions to help me give you information about myself so you can give me even better ideas.
Some strategies really work. According to the American Psychological Association, the most effective stress relief strategies are exercising or playing sports, praying or attending a religious service, reading, listening to music, spending time with friends or family, getting a massage, going outside for a walk, meditating or doing yoga, and spending time with a creative hobby. The least effective strategies are gambling, shopping, smoking, drinking, eating, playing video games, surfing the internet, and watching TV or movies for more than 2 hours.
This is where I think it could be improved, as great as our content is. Go to govin5in and say, give me 8 examples of stress relief strategies that psychological research actually works that I can execute in 1 to 2 minutes. Get up and stretch. Walk around. You can go to our Instagram account, your 1 min break, YOUR1, the number, MIN, BREAK. And we have little activities there. Look at an interesting nature video. Do a little stretch. Do a walk around. Think of what you're grateful for. Look out the window. I think we can do a lot better giving people concrete, small things. Because here's the thing, it's a habit. You don't have to do it perfectly first time around. You're not going to go from browsing Instagram for half an hour to going to yoga class on the spot. That takes a while. But you could, bend over and touch your toes. You could watch a little nature video. You could do something else. Maybe a clip like this from an audiobook. What do you take away from that? What's a concrete thing you could actually do? Type a generative AI prompt in. Add something to your calendar. Let's try this out. Link to this URL.
The main difference between the strategies that work and the strategies that don't. Rather than releasing dopamine and relying on the promise of reward, the real stress relievers boost mood-enhancing brain chemicals like serotonin and GABA or GABA, as well as the feel-good hormone oxytocin.
What actually improves your mood versus giving you immediate reward? Our brains are trained to seek for stimulation, right? Food, click, online, information, email. What actually makes you feel better? Sometimes it's actually not what you think will make you feel better. Sometimes it's painful to just sit down on the couch and look out for 3 minutes. I find that painful. But when I do it, I'm shocked. It actually really helps. Set a stopwatch and try it. 2 minutes, 1 minute, 3.5.
They also help shut down the brain's stress response, reduce stress hormones in the body, and induce the healing relaxation response. Because they aren't exciting like the dopamine releasers, we tend to underestimate how good they will make us feel.
Underestimate how good they'll make us feel. Does that resonate with you?
And so we forget about these strategies, not because they don't work, but because when we're stressed, our brains persistently mispredict what will make us happy.
When we are stressed, our brains persistently mispredict what will make us happy. How can you have accountability with other people? Have a stress buddy. Hey Mary, hey Bob, I'm stressed right now. Remember that URL of this video? Let's play it again. Let generative AI be a stress buddy. Go to Gemini or Copilot or ChatGPT or Perplexity and say, hey, I'm stressed right now. I know I'm going to do the thing that may not actually make me feel better. Give me 5 ideas. Tell me 10 messages to say to myself. And then you skim through them and choose one that works for you.
This means that we'll often talk ourselves out of doing the very thing that will actually make us feel better. The next time you're feeling stressed and about to reach for the promise of relief, consider trying a more effective stress reliever instead. A little help remembering what works. Whenever Denise, who was in charge of new project development for a high-tech startup, had a difficult day at work, she rewarded herself with a bottle of wine and a rendezvous with her favorite real estate website. She clicked through the endless and mind-numbing options of living rooms, kitchens, and backyards. Not limiting herself to her own neighborhood, she would type in faraway cities to see what was for sale in Portland, Raleigh, or Miami. After an hour or so, she felt not so much relaxed as numbed, not to mention a little depressed about her own home's square footage and decidedly non-granite countertops. A few years earlier, when Denise had a less demanding job, she had enjoyed going to yoga class after work. It left her both relaxed and refreshed. She knew that yoga would make her feel better than her wine-fueled real estate voyeurism, but whenever she thought about going to class, it seemed like too much trouble. The pull to go home and uncork a bottle was stronger. As part of our class experiment, Denise committed to doing yoga at least once. When she did, she felt even better than she had remembered and couldn't believe she had talked herself out of it for almost 3 years. Knowing that she was likely to forget again and fall into her old routine, she made a voice memo on her phone after class one evening, describing how good she felt after doing yoga. When she was tempted to skip yoga, she listened to the memo to remind herself, knowing that she could not trust her impulses when she was stressed. Is there a way to remind your stressed out self what actually makes you feel better? What encouragement can you create for yourself before you are stressed? If you eat this cookie, the terrorists win. Last night, I made the mistake of watching the evening news. The opening story was about a failed terrorist bomb plot in the United States, followed by reports of a missile attack overseas and the arrest of a young man for murdering his ex-girlfriend. Just before going to break, the anchor promised to tell me about the surprising thing you eat every day that might give you cancer. Then the show cut to a car commercial. It used to puzzle me. Why do companies advertise during such depressing programming? Do they really want viewers to associate their products with the horror stories that fill the nightly news? And who is going to be in the mood for a department store sale after hearing about a brutal murder or the threat of a terrorist attack? It turns out I might be, and you might be too, thanks to a psychological phenomenon called terror management. According to terror management theory, human beings are, naturally, terrified when we think about our own deaths. It's the one threat we can try to avoid, but will never escape. Whenever we are reminded of our mortality, say every 29 seconds on the nightly news, it triggers a panic response in the brain. We aren't always afraid of it. The anxiety may be just below the surface, creating a free-floating sense of discomfort without our knowing why. Even when it's outside our conscious awareness.
What do you think of that? Terror management. She's just so funny. I want to emulate this in my writing. Like every 29 seconds. She has a very good way of dry, scientific. It doesn't distract from the point. It actually accentuates it by keeping us engaged. I think what makes her book so effective is that she actually taught a course on it. So she got a lot of user feedback from students at Stanford about how to give concrete exercises. Like at the end she'll have Obama slow down. Obama's always say to slow down. Because he slowed down and look where I got him. She had a willpower exercise at the end of every chapter, which I think are based on her course. So it's almost like when you're writing a book, teaches a course. That's why I'm converting my 2 courses to books. Micro books.
This terror creates an immediate need to do something to counter our feelings of powerlessness. We will reach for our security blankets, whatever makes us feel safe, powerful, or comforted. Barack Obama got in a lot of trouble for pointing this out in 2008 when he told a San Francisco crowd that in uncertain times, people cling to guns or religion. Politics aside, terror management theory can teach us a lot about our own willpower failures. We don't just cling to guns and God when we're scared. Many of us also cling to credit cards, cupcakes, and cigarettes. Studies show that being reminded of our mortality makes us more susceptible to all...
The alliteration. When we're scared, we cling to credit cards, cupcakes, and cigarettes. What else do you cling to?
all sorts of temptations as we look for hope and security in the things that promise reward and relief. For example, a study of grocery shoppers found that when people are asked to think about their own death, they make longer shopping lists, are willing to spend more on comfort food, and eat more chocolate and cookies. I can see the retail strategy now. Supermarkets invite local funeral homes to hand out brochures by the shopping carts. Another study found that reports of
See, what I like about this, and I think is helpful, is these studies are very precise. You know, they're not kind of vague things like, oh, when you get scared, you X. They did a study, right? It's very concrete. When you're reminded of your mortality, you make a longer shopping list. Oh, it's like 6 items instead of 4. I think this really helps us visualize what's going on. It sticks in our mind because it's concrete.
death on the news make viewers respond more positively to advertisements for status products like luxury cars and Rolex watches. It's not that we think a Rolex will protect us from a missile attack. It's that these goods bolster our self-image and make us feel powerful.
Bolster our self-image and make us
For
feel
many
powerful.
people, buying things is an immediate way to feel more optimistic and in
Immediate.
control.
You get a hit.
This is surely one reason Americans were so receptive to President George W. Bush's request. Mrs. Bush and I want to encourage Americans to go out shopping following the attacks of September 11th, 2001. It doesn't take planes flying into buildings to press our inner panic buttons. In fact, it doesn't even take real deaths to set us spending.
Random fun fact. I was in a car headed right this way when I heard about the September 11th attacks. Right up there. It was on the radio. As you listen to this, think of, what do you find interesting about what she's saying? Where would you use this? Who else wants to hear this?
Television dramas and movies can have the same effect. In one study, watching a death scene in the 1979 tearjerker film, The Champ, made people willing to pay 3 times as much for something they didn't need and would later regret. Importantly, the participants in this study were oblivious to the fact that watching the film had influenced what they were willing to pay. When given the opportunity to buy an insulated water bottle, they just thought they wanted the water bottle.
Interesting.
In contrast, people who had watched a National Geographic special about the Great Barrier Reef were completely unimpressed by the bottle.
Unimpressed.
And held on to their money. This, no doubt, is how we end up with half the purchases that clutter our homes and pad our credit card bills. We're feeling a little down, we come across an opportunity to purchase something, and a little voice, okay, a few dopamine neurons in our head tell us, buy this, it's everything you never knew you wanted.
Dopamine.
Terror management strategies may take our minds off our inevitable demise, but when we turn to temptation for comfort, we may inadvertently be quickening our race to the grave. Case in point, warnings on cigarette packages can increase a smoker's urge to light up. A 2009 study found that death warnings trigger stress and fear in smokers, exactly what public health officials hope for. Unfortunately, this anxiety then triggers smokers' default stress relief strategy, smoking. Oops. It isn't logical, but it makes sense based on what we know about how stress influences.
It isn't logical, but it's psychological. I think I have a differing opinion here. Like, I think this is one negative consequence of the packets, or maybe of scolding someone like, you're about to die, stop smoking, because it could actually lead them to it more. So I think that's good, they've captured that. On the other hand, it doesn't mean we don't necessarily have these warnings. It's just you have to think more carefully about when you do them and how you do them, right? And maybe that warning makes sense when someone's, calm and relaxed and, they're trying to go on Amazon and order a bunch of this substance, right? This substance could be sugar foods, it could be cigarettes, it could be something else, right? That hastens your rush to the grave because, there's research, right? Sugary foods, other things, alcohol, smoking, even things we do every day, even technology in some way, right? These things are using up your life. They're taking those precious minutes of your life that they're away from you. And so maybe the time to have the more scaring you strategy is when you're calm and you're like, listen, browsing social media for 30 minutes a day instead of 60 minutes is giving you half an hour a day of your life back. Half an hour into 24 hours, especially half an hour into 16, is 1/32nd, right? So imagine you could have 1/32nd, about 3% of your life. What would you do for that fountain of youth to have 3% more life? How much is that? 3% if you live to 60, let's say. What's 3% of 60? 100 divided by 60 is 0.6. 3 times 0.6 is 2.4. I think. You can correct me later. 2.4 extra years of life? Isn't that incredible? I mean, even a day on your deathbed, what would you do for a day of life, a week of life, and high quality life when you're younger, right? So maybe now, hopefully this is in a calm state of voice, is the time to kind of scare people a bit. Or when they're about to order a bunch of like bulk things at Costco or online, that's the time. But then of course, when in the moment, when they're already elevated and stressed, saying that like this is a really bad thing and castigating yourself, feeling bad, right? Leaves to giving in. That may not help then. So the castigation may not be so helpful there. The critique. It's just about timing it appropriately. So what do you all take away from this? What is interesting about this? What's one concrete thing you could do differently? Keep in mind when to kind of remind yourself that technology use, willpower failures are actually shortening your life or using your precious life up. When does that make sense? When you actually say, you know, they're doing that. However, now's not the time to tell myself that. Now's the time to be self-compassionate and realize, like, yes, I'm human, I have willpower failures, we all do it. 8 billion of us, pretty sure. Maybe there's like 5 people in 8 billion who don't have willpower failures, but I'd be surprised. Ready to start back? Who would want to hear this? Who can you link to a particular part of the video and say, hey, I thought you'd find this because of X. What's X?
Is the brain. Stress triggers cravings and makes dopamine neurons even more excited by any temptation in sight. It doesn't help that the smoker is, of course, staring at a pack of cigarettes as he reads the warning. So even as a smoker's brain encodes the words, warning, cigarettes cause cancer, and grapples with awareness of his own mortality, another part of his brain starts screaming, don't worry, smoking a cigarette will make you feel better. There is a global...
I think that's really well said. Think of your brain as multiple entities, agents. One is like, hey, I want to live longer. One is like, you feel better. It's so important. Another is doing something else, you know? If you assume you're one person, it's confusing why you have willpower failures. But if you think of yourself as multiple people, all competing, multiple agents, right? You're a ship. You're not a person swimming in the ocean. You're a ship with many people on it trying to go in different directions. So let's wrap up here. This is a lot. So again, what do you find interesting about this? If you had to tell someone else what you learned from this video, what would you say? What's one concrete thing you could do differently? Just choose one question, think about it. I'll give you all a minute. Alright, have a lovely day. Hope this knowledge was helpful. Send it on, share the word with someone else.